Guga Foods deep fried a brisket in Wagyu beef tallow, and he actually really liked it.
Wow guys, this worked like a charm.
But much more importantly, because of his video, I may have discovered a new way to get a tender and smoky brisket in a literal fraction of the time it takes to barbecue a brisket the traditional way. Because if you think about it, what really makes a barbecued brisket so delicious? Well, in my opinion, this can be boiled down to 3 characteristics: smoke flavor, bark or crust, and tender, juicy meat. And I think that with some tweaks to Guga's recipe, I can get all 3 of these traits through the process of deep frying. So Guga starts his recipe with a full packer brisket, which includes both the point and the flat muscles. However, for my experiment, I will be only using the brisket flat. So in order to deep fry something, you have to completely submerge it in hot fat. And because of that, you have to be very careful with the amount of fat you're cooking with. When dropping the brisket in the hot fat, the fat will of course rise, which in tandem with the bubbles rapidly surfacing from the evaporating water from the brisket, may result in an absolute disaster. As displayed perfectly by Chef Action Jackson as he attempts to make some fries with way too much oil and way too many fries for that tiny little pot he's using. By deep frying the flat muscle only, because I have very little experience with deep frying, I am greatly reducing my risk of a grease fire. Another note, Guga used a prime grade brisket for his experiment, while I'm using a choice grade brisket flat. And because of this, my brisket has much less intramuscular fat, so I need to be very careful when cooking this to ensure I don't dry my brisket out. But if you try this at home, I recommend using a higher grade beef, like from ButcherBox, sponsor of today's video. Now you're gonna wanna hear this because I'm gonna tell you about a limited time promotion that ButcherBox is running that will give you free wings for the lifetime of your subscription. So ButcherBox is a service that delivers high quality meat right to your doorstep with free shipping in the continental US and no surprise fees. And you can choose from a variety of plan options, from curated to customized, and you have the freedom to change your plan whenever you want. And they only carry 100% grass-fed beef, free-range organic chicken, pork raised crate-free, and wild-caught seafood. Everything is humanely raised with no antibiotics or added hormones. So this box was actually curated for me by ButcherBox, and I love the variety they gave me. And I can make so many meals for my family with all of this. I can make smoked brisket, pork ribs, tacos or burnt ends with the chuck roast, baked chicken and salmon, and the list goes on. And for a limited time, you can get even more meat with your subscription, because if you sign up now, new members receive 3 pounds of organic chicken wings in every ButcherBox for the lifetime of their membership. So use my link in the description box to sign up, and make sure you act fast because this wing promotion ends on February 7th, 2023. So make sure you sign up for your ButcherBox today. And with that said, let's move on to achieving the first characteristic of a delicious brisket, which is the smoke flavor. So Guga does not opt to add any smoke flavor in any step of his recipe, and as such, the only dry seasoning he uses is regular old salt. However, I will be using smoked salt to season my brisket. And if you've never used smoked salt, let me tell you, you can really smell and taste the smoke flavor in this salt. So I'm really hoping that strong flavor will really come through in the end product. After salting, Guga refrigerates his brisket overnight, and this process is commonly referred to as dry brining. And in my opinion, this is a great option, not only for the benefit of allowing the salt to penetrate the meat rather than getting washed off in the hot oil bath immediately, but also for another reason. When dry brining, the salt pulls the moisture out of the brisket, and then that salty moisture reabsorbs back into the meat. This leaves the surface of the meat dry, as you can see by the dark red color of the brisket following Guga's overnight dry brine. This makes deep frying the brisket safer because there will be a lot less water on the brisket surface, which will produce less bubbles when initially dropping the brisket in the oil. And for these reasons, I will dry brine my brisket as well with the aforementioned smoked salt. But I'm gonna add even more smoke flavor as we prepare one of the most important ingredients for this recipe, the tallow. And Guga didn't just use any tallow. He used Wagyu beef tallow, which is the highest grade of beef tallow you can possibly get. Now, because Guga is a big baller and cooks Japanese A5 Wagyu steaks like every meal of the day, he had enough trimmings left over to render his own beef tallow. And he added in some garlic and rosemary to add some additional flavor since he only seasoned with plain salt. Well, I'm not a baller like Guga, but luckily there are slightly cheaper options to get Wagyu beef tallow, like buying these tubs for about $30 on Amazon. But this is by no means cheap. Like seriously, it cost me like $100 for the 3 tubs I bought for this video. But alternatively, you can just buy any oil or shortening for like a fraction of the price if you wanted to try this at home and save some money. So unlike Guga, I will not be adding aromatics to my tallow. Instead, I will use this as an opportunity to introduce even more smoke flavor into this brisket by smoking the tallow in my Cam Chef Woodwind Pro overnight at 180 degrees Fahrenheit. Now, if you don't have a smoker at home, then don't let that stop you from trying out this recipe. In fact, a regular deep fried brisket and beef tallow might actually taste better than mine, because I've actually never used smoked beef tallow to deep fry anything, so I have no idea what it's gonna taste like. But since beef tallow has such a high smoke point, I seriously doubt I'm gonna get any off flavors from the infused smoke, because I'm gonna be cooking at relatively low temperatures when I deep fry the brisket. And with the brisket dry brined and the fat ready for the fry, it's time to develop the second characteristic of a good brisket, which is the bark. The bark is the dark, almost black crust on the outside of the brisket. This happens during a process called the Maillard reaction. You can see the exact same browning effect when you toast bread or put a sear on a steak, and also when you deep fry foods, like for instance, a brisket. However, with deep frying a brisket, the Maillard reaction occurs very rapidly, giving the meat a brown crust in minutes in comparison to the 4 to 5 hours it takes to get a crust when you smoke a brisket. To demonstrate this stark difference, I'll cook up 2 dino chicken nuggets. One nugget I'll cook in my Camp Chef pellet grill at 350 degrees Fahrenheit for 2 minutes, and the other I'll deep fry at 350 degrees Fahrenheit for 2 minutes on the Sidekick burner. As you can see, the deep fried nugget is a beautiful crispy brown, and the smoked nugget almost looks like I just took it out of the freezer. But not only are they different in their crusts, we can also see a difference on the inside of the nuggets, where the smoked nugget is still frozen inside, and the deep fried nugget is completely cooked through and through. That's because when food is deep fried, the surrounding oil is simultaneously cooking it from all angles that the hot oil is touching, making the cooking process super quick, especially in comparison to a pellet smoker. In Guga's video, he attempted to slow down this rapid cooking by cooking the brisket initially at 200 degrees Fahrenheit, and then once it was almost done, he hiked up the oil temperature to 400 degrees Fahrenheit to give the brisket a nice crust. But for my brisket, I'm gonna fry it at 350 degrees Fahrenheit the entire cook, because my hope is that this will give the brisket a much better crust this way. But with that said, there is a very good reason why Guga fried his brisket low and slow to start out his cook, and that reason is connected to the third and final characteristic of a good barbecue brisket, which is tender, juicy meat. So brisket is beef, but unlike some other cuts of beef, like a tri-tip or a New York strip, if you barbecue a brisket or roast it, you have to cook it until it's beyond well done. In fact, a smoked brisket is not finished until its internal temperature is around 200 degrees Fahrenheit. And the reason for this is because brisket has a high amount of a special protein called collagen. Collagen can be found in connective tissues like tendons and skin, which is the main reason why my youthful face has a nice bounce and springiness to it. And a brisket has that exact same springiness. So if you try to cook a medium rare brisket in a smoker, and as a result did not break down the collagen, your brisket would basically be a dog's chew toy. However, when collagen breaks down, it becomes gelatin, which is the exact opposite of collagen in terms of the texture, because it just melts in your mouth. But in order for the collagen in the brisket to completely break down, it needs to reach a temperature of around 175 degrees Fahrenheit. But it's not enough to just reach that temperature, because the brisket needs to stay above that temperature for a few hours to ensure that all of the collagen has completely broken down. Guga accomplishes this with his method of deep frying because he fried his brisket at 200 degrees Fahrenheit, and he cooked it all the way to an internal of 190 degrees Fahrenheit before hiking up the temperature. Because his brisket slowly climbed up to that 190 degree temperature, there was plenty of time for the collagen to break down, resulting in a beautiful tender bite at the end.
Oh, so tender.
Oh my God.
I mean, come on, huh? Is that tender enough for you? I know you're gonna ask me. That's tender, look at that. That you can't get that if you just deep fry it directly. You gotta deep fry it in 2 stages. Look at my mouth.
Oh my God.
However, while cooking this for myself, I quickly learned another very important reason as to why Guga cooked his brisket low and slow for the majority of the cook. And I'm an absolute moron for not realizing this until it was too late. And that reason is burning. So my original plan was to deep fry the brisket at 350 degrees Fahrenheit until the internal temperature of the brisket reached 200 degrees Fahrenheit. Then I was going to let it rest in the oven for 6 hours to allow the collagen to completely break down. But this plan would never work because a brisket is just such a big piece of meat. By the time the inside of the brisket was finished cooking, the outside would be burnt to a crisp, and I realized that way too late. At about the 15-minute mark, the internal temperature of the brisket was at 111 degrees, but the brisket crust looked like this. It looks more like a crispy pork belly than a brisket. And the decal fat is completely obliterated. And that poor fat cap is so crispy. Oh my gosh. Well, in barbecue, the cook doesn't always go your way. And while the weak run, hide, and destroy all video evidence that a failure ever happened, the strong adapt. And I intend to throw everything but the kitchen sink at this brisket to save this cook. Yo, is that Goldie's brisket rub? That's my absolute favorite. Let's go ahead and throw some on the brisket, both sides. And since we deep fry this brisket Wagyu beef tallow, a little more couldn't hurt, so let's try and soften up the bark with it and wrap it up with a tearful prayer. Then I'll throw it in the oven at 200 degrees Fahrenheit until the internal temperature is the same, to let it climb up to temp slowly. And here we are in the present, and this brisket is just about ready to open up and slice. Now, because the internal temperature of this brisket was so low when I took it out of the fryer, I think there's still a good chance that this brisket is still gonna be fairly juicy on the inside. But the crust was pretty far gone when I took it out of the fryer, so I expect the outer layer to be very dry and almost jerky-like. But again, we'll see if that beef tallow helped to kind of mellow that out a little bit and make it a little softer. But honestly, I have no idea what this thing is gonna taste like, and I don't even know what it's gonna look like. But this has been a very humbling experience because usually when I do these cooks for the first time on this YouTuber series, I usually do pretty good and the end product ends up being up to my standards. So it's good to have a reality check like this once in a while. But honestly, I probably should have known that Guga took the time to plan out his video and cooked it exactly the way that he did so that he could avoid problems like I faced today. So GG, well played Guga, you got me. Got Guga'd in my own home. Unbelievable. But the brisket is rested up and ready to slice, so let's go ahead and open this thing and see if I was able to save this brisket.
Ready?
So Guga's brisket is clearly superior to mine, but it honestly didn't turn out that bad. The bottom of the brisket was really crispy, so the beef tallow didn't save it much and it just kind of shredded all over the cutting board while I was slicing it. But the fat cap is actually kind of surprising because I was expecting it to be really crispy and crunchy as well, kind of like pork crackling. But it's actually relatively soft and it's a little bit sticky too, kind of like you would get from a smoked brisket. And I will say that this brisket has no smoke smell whatsoever, but I'm gonna see if it has a smoky taste. I taste no smoke flavor. In fact, this doesn't taste anywhere close to a smoked brisket. This experiment is a complete fail. This is one of the worst briskets I have ever made on this channel. It kind of tastes like pot roast, but like beef bacon at the same time. It's just weird, man. But in terms of creativity, this brisket ranks up there with the sous vide brisket that I cooked on my last video. Except that sous vide brisket was like a million times better than this one. So make sure you check out that video on your screen right now, and I'll see you guys over there.